Have you forgiven? But inside, you still bleed in silence. Maybe no one notices. Maybe you've convinced the world and yourself that everything is fine. But there's a place inside you that still throbs with a silent pain. A pain that doesn't scream, that doesn't beg, but remains there, immobile, like an invisible presence. It's not unforgiveness. It's unheard silence. It's the soul speaking softly because it's tired of not being heard. Rumi wrote, "The wound is the place where the light enters." But what if you're running away from the light? What if this wound never healed because deep down you learned to keep quiet, to smile on the outside while inside you beg for peace? Often the soul forgives, but the body remembers. The heart understands, but the chest still tightens. And that's where the chasm between the forgiveness we offer and the healing we don't experience arises. Because no one taught us that forgiving doesn't mean forgetting. No one told us that even after letting go there can be an echo, a heavy silence, an emptiness where relief should reside. This is the pain the world doesn't validate. The pain after forgiveness. The pain you feel when everyone expects you to have already moved on. And you even try. You say, "I've forgiven." You say, "I've moved on." But when you lay your head on the pillow, you realize there's still something throbbing. Maybe you've forgiven that betrayal, or that absence. Maybe you've forgiven harsh words, cold gestures, or the abandonment of someone who promised to stay. You were great. You were strong. But inside, there are still pieces. And the cruelest part of all, this kind of pain has no name. It has no color. It has no explanation. It simply exists, quiet, deep, constant. And the more you try to ignore it, the more it calls to you. There is a pain that you have learned to hide even from God. Yes, even God's. Because you've learned to feel guilty for still feeling, for still crying inside, for still carrying a weight that, in theory, should have been dropped by now. But what if I told you that this pain isn't weakness, that this silence is actually a whisper from your soul asking to be heard? That forgiveness was just the beginning, not the end of your healing process. You are not alone. There are thousands of wounded souls like yours who have forgiven everything, but who have yet to be seen in their silent pain. Souls who want to move on, but who still need to be welcomed. And that's why this video exists. To be a mirror, to be a shelter, to be that safe corner where you can finally breathe without having to pretend. Because there's a truth no one tells you. Real healing begins when you have the courage to look at what still hurts, even after you've said, "I forgive." Rumi, with all his spiritual wisdom, knew that the silence of pain is not the end. It is the passage. It is where the soul begins to whisper what the ego tried to silence. It is where truth reveals itself, where the sacred touches the forgotten. And maybe it's now at this very moment that you're ready to hear it. Because the pain that remains is not an enemy. It's a messenger, and she wants to show you something that you might not understand yet. But for that, you need to stay a little longer, breathe calmly, and hear what no one ever had the courage to tell you. So take a deep breath and answer me sincerely. Do you feel that way too? That feeling of having done everything right, forgiving, being mature, letting go, and yet still carrying a pain that no one sees? Write here in the comments, "I forgave, but it still hurts. Let me vent." It's not weakness, it's liberation. Sometimes writing is the first step for the soul to truly begin to heal. This video isn't just another piece of content. It's a mirror, made for you who are tired of pretending you're okay, who need to hear something different from the superficial world that only tells you, keep moving forward. But how can you move on if you haven't even had space to feel? So if this message touched something inside you, leave your like now. Not just for me, but for you. Because every time you like, comment, and subscribe here, you are saying, this pain deserves to be seen. This healing needs to be talked about. This space is mine too. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any episode of this journey. Each video here was made as a whisper from the soul, and you're not alone. Now, let's go deeper, because what you feel is more common than you think, and deeper than the world sees. There's a pain no one sees, a pain you've learned to hide even from God. But Rumi said, even your pain is a prayer, and perhaps now, in this silent moment between what you feel and what you've never been able to say out loud, that prayer is being heard for the first time, because there are pains that don't need sound but presence, And perhaps you've spent your whole life surrounded by people, but without ever being truly heard. You forgave, maybe more than once. You forgave those who lied, those who betrayed you, those who turned their backs right when you needed them most. You forgave absence disguised as presence. You forgave indifference, lack of care, promises broken over time, and you even forgave what you never had, the love you hoped for that never came. You did so thinking that by forgiving, the pain would go away, that by saying it's okay, your heart would magically close. But it wasn't, because no one prepared you for what comes next. No one talks about what happens after you say, I forgive, but you still wake up with a heavy chest. After you decide to move on, but feel like a part of you was trapped in that moment, in that unspoken word, in that goodbye that never happened. The world congratulates you on your forgiveness but ignores the pain that remains, the one you hold so tightly that you no longer know how to express it. And that's why today you live like someone who breathes but isn't fulfilled, like someone who smiles with their mouth but not with their soul. Maybe no one notices, but you feel it. Deep in your quietest days, there's still an echo, a whisper, a nameless longing, a silence that hurts. It's the kind of pain that isn't loud, that doesn't spill out in front of others, but that follows like a faithful shadow, the pain that visits you in the wee hours of the morning, when no one is looking, the pain that whispers, you haven't been heard yet. And all of this makes you doubt yourself, because if you've forgiven, why do you still feel so much? If you've let go, why does it still hold you back? That's where the conflict begins. You think you're wrong for still feeling, but you're not. Feeling isn't a failure. Feeling is human. Feeling is the sign that something inside you wants to be truly healed, not in a rush. Rumi knew this. He said, the wound is the place where the light enters. But he also said that one shouldn't rush the blossoming of the soul, that there is a sacred time between forgiveness and liberation. And maybe you're in that time now, in that mysterious interval where the soul begins to understand what the mind still tries to control. You want to forget, but there are parts of you that still need to be heard before they leave. And that's okay. That doesn't make you weak. It makes you real. Because there's a huge difference between forgiving out of wisdom and forgiving out of fear. Often, you forgive because you're exhausted, because you want peace, because you believe that if you keep carrying that grudge, you'll drown. But when that forgiveness comes only from exhaustion and not from understanding, it leaves open wounds that no one sees. And that's why, even after forgiving, you still feel it. Because true forgiveness doesn't ignore the pain, it penetrates it. And crossing hurts. It hurts because it demands presence. It demands that you stop running from what's still inside you. And no one wants to look inward when they've already given so much of themselves outward. No one wants to return to the place where they were hurt. But sometimes that's exactly where the answer lies. The spiritual key that frees the wounded soul. And Rumi said, don't move as fear dictates. Move as love guides you. But to move with love, you first need to recognize where you're still stuck in pain. This is the moment when many souls are lost, because they don't understand why they still feel. They believe they failed, that they weren't good enough, that they didn't forgive properly. But there's no right way to forgive. There's your way, and it deserves to be respected. You may have silenced your pain for years. You may have bottled up your tears, molded yourself to fit into spaces too small for your soul. You may have adapted to what hurt you just to keep the one who was supposed to love you close. But now it's time to look at this pain with new eyes. Not to suffer again, but to understand what it still wants to show you. Maybe she's telling you that you lost yourself while trying to keep others close. Maybe she's reminding you that there are parts of you that have never been validated, and that the forgiveness you've given others needs to be given to yourself as well. Because forgiving those who hurt you is noble. But forgiving yourself for accepting so little for so long, that is sacred. And in this silence where you find yourself now, between what you feel and what you still try to silence, a new possibility is emerging. Not to forget, not to erase, but to transform. Because the silence of pain is not absence. It's a call, an invitation from the soul to hear again what has been ignored. And maybe, just maybe, that's where true healing begins. If you feel that this silence also lives within you, write here in the comments, my pain still speaks and today I listen. This sentence isn't just a comment, it's an act of courage. And it could be the first step toward reconnecting with your own truth. Have you ever felt like you've forgiven, but still carry the weight of what wasn't said? That conversation that never happened. That tear you held back just to show everything was okay. That last word you swallowed to preserve the peace. But deep down, there was no peace. There was only a heavy silence. A kind of emptiness that no one notices, but that follows you in every detail. In the way you breathe deeper when you're alone. In the lost look in your eyes when no one is watching. It's in this silence that what hasn't been resolved resides. And it's in this invisible space that your heart continues to scream. Maybe you did everything right. You forgave because you understood that holding a grudge would only hurt you more. You forgave because you no longer wanted to be trapped in the past. You forgave because you wanted to move on. But what happens when forgiveness isn't enough to silence what still lives inside you? When despite every rational decision, your soul still groans in the darkness because it wasn't truly heard? The truth is, emotional pain doesn't follow logic. And no matter how much you say you're fine, there's a part of you that keeps asking for attention, for listening, for acceptance. This is the invisible problem no one talks about. The pain that comes after the decision. The emptiness that remains after forgiveness. When the world believes you've overcome it, but inside you a storm still rages. And worse, a silent storm. Because now everything seems resolved. Everything seems at peace. But true peace doesn't come while there are parts of you that continue to feel abandoned by yourself. There's a difference between forgiving and healing. And it's profound. Because forgiving is an act directed toward the other. A gesture we often make out of love or even self-protection. But healing requires going inward, looking at what's left, sitting with your pain without trying to push it away, listening to it, embracing it. Healing takes time, and it requires that you stop pretending it's over, that you stop using "I've already forgiven" as armor to hide what still hurts. How many times have you caught yourself trying to justify your pain, telling yourself you shouldn't feel this way anymore, that it's been a while, that everything is resolved? But your body knows, your soul knows, your silence betrays you. Because when something isn't acknowledged, it repeats itself. And that's why you keep returning to the same thoughts, the same memories, the same internal scenarios. It's as if there's a part of your history trapped in a cycle, waiting to be freed. Rumi said that the soul has its own time to blossom. And perhaps yours is just now opening to what you've tried to silence for so long. There's something sacred in recognizing that, even after forgiveness, you still need space to feel. That not all pain ends when we decide to let go. Some pain needs to be navigated with presence, not haste. And if you still feel it, it's because something inside deserves to be looked at with more compassion. Maybe it's that version of you that believed in love and was betrayed. The one that was too strong on the outside and forgotten on the inside. The one that silenced your desires to keep someone close. And even after everything you said, "I forgive." You said it because it was the right thing to do. You said it because you wanted freedom. But you forgot that your soul doesn't follow manuals. It follows truths. And your truth, perhaps, is that it still hurts. This invisible pain needs to be spoken. It needs to be named. And not because you want to dwell on the past, but because you need to heal completely. The problem is that the world doesn't give you space for this. It expects you to be strong, resilient, wise, to move forward with class, spirituality, maturity. But no one asks if you're truly ready, if you're truly whole, if you've truly been heard. And that's why spiritual healing needs to go beyond concepts. It needs to touch reality. It needs to find the wound where it still throbs. It needs to go back to the exact point where you began to shut down, where you stopped saying what you felt, where you understood that your pain was a nuisance to others, and began hiding it, even from yourself. This is where deep healing begins, when you give yourself permission to feel everything you tried to bury with forgiveness, when you understand that forgiveness was just a step, but not the whole journey. And most importantly, when you understand that you don't need to rush, that there's no guilt in still feeling, that there's no mistake in still carrying longing, anger, hurt, and confusion, that these emotions don't diminish your spirituality, they make it more real. Rumi wrote, "You were created in love. Why then do you live in fear?" Maybe now is the time to let go of that fear. Fear of showing yourself. Fear of recognizing yourself. Fear of admitting that it still hurts. Because when you let the pain speak, it begins to transform. It stops controlling you because it has finally been heard. Have you ever stopped to think that this silence you carry could be exactly the place where God wants to meet you? That perhaps this pain is a temple, a sacred space where healing wants to be born? But for that, you need to stop running away. And above all, you need to stop judging yourself. The pain that remains is not a sign that you failed. It's a sign that you still feel. And feeling is the greatest form of presence. If at any point in this video you saw yourself, write here in the comments, "What was silent today wants to be heard." This sentence is yours, and it could be the beginning of something your soul has long awaited. You don't suffer because you haven't forgiven. You suffer because you expected forgiveness to heal on its own. You suffer because you were led to believe that all you had to do was say, "I forgive," and everything would calm down inside you. But no one told you what happens after forgiveness. No one explained to you that the heart, even when it chooses to move on, can carry open wounds. Wounds that aren't a lack of forgiveness, they're a lack of inner listening. You did forgive, yes, but you kept hoping that this act would be enough to silence what still screams. And the silence never came. On the contrary, it grew. Rumi said, "You have to keep breaking your heart until it opens." And perhaps this is the most painful part of the spiritual journey. Accepting that pain is not the end, but the process. That suffering is not a mistake to be eliminated, but a gateway to a deeper truth about who you are. You break, you shatter, you remake yourself, and in the midst of this silent alchemy, the soul shows you who you have always been. Many people confuse healing with forgetting. They believe that healing is about stopping remembering, that healing is about ceasing to feel. But true spiritual healing isn't about the absence of pain, it's about being fully present with it. It's when you can look at what hurt, and still hurts, with compassion and without denial. When you stop fighting your own emotional memory and start listening to what it wants to reveal to you. This is the root of the pain that remains after forgiveness. It arises from the imbalance between what you've rationally decided and what your soul still needs to process. Because the soul doesn't move at the same pace as the mind. The mind wants to overcome, resolve, control. The soul wants to integrate, understand, transcend, and it's in this disconnect between reason and spirit that many hearts become ill, because they pretend everything is resolved, but they continue to carry sadness in their eyes. They continue to wake up with a tight chest. They continue to smile on the outside while dying on the inside. That's why Rumi spoke so much about pain as an invitation. He knew that pain isn't enough to destroy, but to reveal. Every broken heart carries a hidden key, a lesson that can only be learned in the silence of breaking. And it's not about suffering for the sake of suffering, but about understanding that pain is a passage, a narrow corridor through which only what is true passes. The rest falls away. The rest dissolves. The rest reveals itself to be illusion. Perhaps your soul is in that corridor right now, trying to find meaning in what still pulses. And as much as you want to run away, something inside you knows. You must cross. Because pain that isn't crossed turns into shadow. And shadow isn't the absence of light. It's light that's been denied. That's why you feel this weight, this repetition, this anguish that has no form, but is present. It's the call of what you haven't yet allowed yourself to feel completely. How many times have you tried to silence the pain with ready-made phrases? It's over. It was better this way. Everything happens for a reason. Phrases the world has spiritualized without depth. Words that, instead of healing, silenced you. Because no one taught you that true spirituality is also raw, real, and vulnerable. That there's a sacredness in the tears that flow silently. That there's a divine presence in that moment when you recognize, I'm still broken. And that's okay. Because breaking isn't the end. It's the beginning. It's where the soul begins to open to something greater, to something truer, to something that doesn't fit into the formulas you've tried to follow until now. The spiritual root of your pain may not lie in what happened, but in what you believed should happen. You hoped forgiveness would be the end, but it was only the first step. The true path begins when you decide to listen to what still hurts without rushing to fix it. There's a wound inside that doesn't need judgment, but acceptance. Not answers, but presence. And that's the invitation your pain is extending to you. Maybe you don't need to run away anymore. Maybe you just need to sit before it like a mirror and say, I see you. Because when you see the pain with the eyes of the soul, it stops screaming, because it's finally been acknowledged. And the soul thirsts for this recognition, not from others, but from you, from your gentle gaze, from your true listening, from your inner touch that says, I no longer need to hide from myself. This is living spirituality, not the kind that denies suffering in the name of artificial peace, but the kind that dives deep with courage and love into the dark waters of one's own truth. Rumi also said that the soul always knows what to do to heal itself. The challenge is to silence the mind. And that's precisely the challenge you're facing now, trying to find the path between what you feel and what others have thought for you, between what still hurts and what the world expects you to overcome. But maybe, just maybe, it's time to let go of those expectations, to let go of the weight of what no longer belongs to you, and simply listen. Listen to what your pain wants to show you. Listen to the wisdom within your own silence. Listen to the prayer behind every tear you've avoided crying. Listen, as Rumi said, not with your ears, but with your heart. If this passage resonated with you, if you felt that there is something inside you that finally wants to be truly heard, write in the comments. My soul doesn't want to forget. It wants to transform. This phrase can be the first step in reminding you that there is beauty even in pain, when it is experienced with awareness. What no one tells you is that forgiveness frees others, but healing frees you. And perhaps this is the most forgotten, most neglected, and yet most powerful key there is. Because yes, you were taught to forgive, to move on, to not hold grudges, to release those who hurt you, but no one taught you what to do with what's left inside, with the emptiness that remains even after forgiveness, with the heavy silence that settles where there was once a loud pain. And the cruelest thing is that when you do everything right and still feel it, you start to think the problem is you, but it's not. The truth is, there's a kind of pain that doesn't dissolve with forgiveness, because it's not just connected to the other person. It's connected to parts of you that have never been heard. Sometimes you've forgiven the person who abandoned you, but never listened to the part of you that still cries out to be chosen. You've forgiven the person who left, but haven't embraced the part that's been begging to be seen. And therein lies the secret that almost no one has the courage to share. The pain that won't go away isn't asking you to forget the person, but to finally listen to yourself. This silenced pain is an inner child waiting to be heard, a version of you frozen in time, at the exact moment you didn't feel enough, loved, or welcomed. It stayed there, waiting for the day you'd come back for it. But instead you pushed it into a dark corner of your soul, calling it maturity. You hardened yourself, you occupied yourself, you kept quiet, you even smiled, but inside, that child still cries. And when Rumi talked about continuing to break your heart until it opens, that's what it was about going back to where you stopped feeling, about descending into the most hidden parts of your soul and rescuing what's left. Because without that, forgiveness becomes just a pretty idea, a decision without substance, without rooting, without transformation. Forgiving without healing is like opening a cage and remaining trapped inside, and that's what hurts. The hidden key is understanding that healing doesn't happen in the other person. It doesn't happen when they apologize or when life does justice. Real healing begins when you stop waiting for external recognition and start recognizing yourself, when you stop fighting to forget what happened and begin to understand what it triggered within you. Because what hurts most isn't what was done to you, but what it made you believe about yourself. And if you stop now for a moment to listen to this inner silence, you might realize that it's not asking you to react. It's asking you to listen, because there's a pain inside that doesn't want an explanation but a presence. A pain that doesn't want to be overcome. It wants to be acknowledged. And in this acknowledgement, something profound begins to transform. Not because the past changes, but because you change the way you relate to it. You begin to realize that the pain wasn't the end. It was a portal, a call from your soul saying, come back to me, come back to your essence, come back to your truth, come back to who you were before you molded yourself to fit in with the love of others, before you kept quiet so as not to disturb, before you forgot yourself trying to be remembered by someone. This is the true movement of healing. It's not about moving forward while ignoring what you feel, but about moving deeper, deeper within yourself, with the courage to look at what hasn't been said, at what still resonates, at what constrains you inside. And that's when you begin to realize that the pain that remains is the map, that what you tried to bury is exactly what needs to blossom now. The key is to stop running away, to stop betraying yourself with spiritual justifications that only serve to silence you, to stop using forgiveness as a shield to avoid feeling, because feeling isn't losing yourself. Feeling is allowing yourself, and only when you allow yourself to feel do you begin to truly heal. And healing isn't about going back to who you were before you got hurt. It's about being born again. It's about becoming who you were never allowed to be. It's about looking yourself in the eye and saying, I'll come back for me, even if no one comes back, even if no one understands, even if it still hurts. Because now you understand that it's not about the other person. It never was. It was always about the part of you that you let go of in order to forgive. Maybe you said, I forgive, hoping for peace, and found an abyss. But now you know, the abyss wasn't the end. It was the beginning. It was the space between the pain you carried and the healing you hadn't yet found. And that space begins to fill when you accept that forgiveness was a gesture, but healing is an ongoing choice, a path, a journey back inward, and this path is yours alone. No one else will walk it for you. No external validation will fulfill you. No absence will stop hurting as long as you remain absent from yourself. But when you commit to this journey, something changes. You stop waiting. You stop searching outside, and you finally begin to remember who you are. If all this made sense to you, if somewhere inside you felt this inner child trying to call you back, write here in the comments, today I come back for myself. It's not just a phrase, it's a pact, a starting point for a healing that begins when you finally decide to listen to what has been silent. Maybe you forgave someone who betrayed you, who left you, who didn't know how to love you. Maybe you did it more than once. And it wasn't out of weakness. It was because your soul always wanted to believe in the beauty of starting over, in the possibility that love can heal what love has hurt. You said, I'm fine, with a firm voice, a clear gaze, your heart trying to believe that moving on would be enough to silence what still screamed inside you. But in the silence of the night, when everything gets too quiet, when no one else is looking, your soul still writes letters that will never be sent. Letters that have no recipient, or maybe they do. Maybe they still bear the name of the person you tried to forget. Maybe they still carry memories that time couldn't erase. Or maybe they're addressed to a part of you that you left behind the moment you decided to move on without truly saying goodbye. Because forgiving doesn't always mean closing. Sometimes it's just a new kind of waiting. A gap between what was experienced and what still needs to be understood. And you understand this when you begin to realize that you're living as if everything is resolved, but your body still responds with pain, with anguish, with an emptiness that appears in subtle forms, unexplained insomnia, an unexplained lump in your throat, a suppressed cry that visits you amidst a song, a scent, a silence. It's as if your heart is still waiting for an answer that never comes. And deep down, you know, this answer won't come from someone else. It needs to be born within you. Your story may be similar to that of many souls walking in silence. Maybe you've forgiven those who didn't choose you, those who left you waiting, those who disappeared in the midst of your love. And maybe you've moved on, yes. You've changed your life, filled your days, remade your plans. But there's a place inside you that still looks back, not because you want to go back, but because you still haven't understood why leaving hurt so much. And then you ask yourself, if I've forgiven, why do I still feel it? And the answer doesn't come from outside. It's not in pre-packaged advice, nor in spiritual phrases that try to speed up your healing. The answer lies in your own truth. It's in that exact moment when you realize that the forgiveness you offered to the other was never enough to heal the wound left within you. Because that pain wasn't just about what happened. It was about what it made you believe about yourself. You thought you weren't enough, that you weren't worthy, that you weren't lovable enough to be chosen, respected, cared for, and you forgave, thinking that would be enough to erase the feeling. But forgetting isn't synonymous with healing, because the soul doesn't forget what hasn't been resolved. It just learns to hide, to keep quiet, to create versions of itself that fit what the world expects. And you did. You created a version that works, that smiles, that works, that even loves again. But inside there are still unsent letters, And these letters speak of everything you didn't have the courage to say. They speak of the longing you deemed immature. They speak of the hurt you said you no longer felt. They speak of the fear of being abandoned again. They speak of the anger you tried to spiritualize, but which still lives between the lines of your voice. They speak of the almost childish desire to have been truly seen, truly loved, truly chosen. And you don't need to be ashamed of it. You're not wrong for still feeling. You haven't failed in your healing process. Quite the contrary. Feeling is the first sign that your soul is awake, that it refuses to accept superficial healing, that it wants truth, it wants depth, it wants wholeness. And that's why it hurts, because you're in the process of coming back to yourself. And this process has no map. It's unique. It's yours. Maybe you were the one who held it all together, who didn't want to worry anyone, who learned not to depend, who became too strong too soon. Maybe you were the one who always listened, but was never heard, the one who always welcomed, but was never welcomed. And yet, you forgave, you moved on, you loved again. But inside, there were still loose pieces, and these fragments aren't weakness. They're invitations. They're signs that there's still something to be said, something to be felt, something to be healed. Maybe it's time to return to that unsent letter, to reread what your soul silently wrote, not to give it to someone else, but to finally give it to yourself. Because there are pains that only transform when you have the courage to listen to them until the end, without rushing, without judgment, without masks. And if while listening you feel like crying, cry. If you feel angry, feel it. If you feel homesick, allow it. Because all these emotions are paths. They all point to the same place, reconnecting with your essence, with your truth, with the version of you that didn't have to hide to be loved. Rumi said, "The wound is the place where the light enters." And perhaps now, in this moment when you finally look at what was left unsaid, that light is beginning to enter. Perhaps all of this is not the end, but the beginning of what has always been waiting for you. If you felt even silently that this letter could have been yours too, write in the comments, "I still have words that no one has heard." Because sometimes putting into words what you've always kept quiet is the first step to freeing yourself from everything that's been trapped inside. You are not the pain. You are the courage to have loved even without return. You are the strength that did not give up on loving, even when it was unrequited. You are the soul that chose to keep feeling, even when it would have been easier to shut down. You have already broken. You have already been silent. You have had to rebuild yourself in silence. But even so, you remained. You remained with a heart that, despite being wounded, still beats with truth. And this truth is what sets you apart. It is what saves you. It is what guides you back to yourself. Rumi said, "Don't settle for stories of how things happen to others. Awaken your own legend." And perhaps this is the time to realize that you are not here to repeat other people's scripts. You are not here to experience love as survival, nor forgiveness as an obligation. You are here to create a path where your pain is not a burden, but a seed. Because even pain, when embraced, becomes fertile soil for a soul that has decided to flourish. You've cried for those who didn't feel your absence. You've waited for words that never came. You've given more than you had, believing that in doing so it would finally be enough. And when it wasn't, you thought the problem was you. But it wasn't. You weren't too much. You weren't difficult to love. You were just trying to be understood by people who never learned to hear what silence says. And your silence said a lot. Now you begin to understand. You begin to realize that the pain that felt like punishment was actually an awakening. That the ending that felt like injustice was the beginning of a return home, inward. Because every time you break, something inside you reveals itself. Every time you are disappointed, a layer of illusion dissolves. And every time you decide to carry on, even with your heart in pieces, you affirm, "I am bigger than this." This is the shift in consciousness that changes everything. When you stop asking why someone did that to you, and start asking what it showed you about what you hadn't yet seen. Because yes, you were betrayed, abandoned, forgotten, but what did that trigger in you? What forced you to see? Where was the original wound you carried long before that person arrived? Most of today's pains are echoes of past ones. Today's rejection touches yesterday's abandonment. Today's betrayal touches the absence you felt in childhood. The feeling of not being a priority reveals how much you learned, from an early age, to put yourself second. And that's why it hurts so much. because it's not just about the present, it's about everything that was stuck back then. And when you see this, something inside you changes. You stop waiting for others to validate what you feel. You stop seeking outside what has always been inside. You stop chasing love, attention, and approval. Because you understand that all of this stems from a void that only you can fill. And this void is not a mistake. It is a sacred space, a temple waiting for your true presence. Not a presence that feigns strength, but a presence that recognizes itself even in vulnerability. Pain at this point stops being an enemy. It becomes an ally, a warning, a clear sign that you're leaving the automatic and entering into yourself. Every tear you hold back has a story. Every tightness in your chest has a source. And you're here now not to get rid of it, but to transform it, to let the pain tell its story, and then, finally, let it say goodbye. And that's how you begin to write your own legend. Not a perfect story, but a true story. A story where you're no longer a supporting character in the pain, but a protagonist in the healing. Where you don't repeat patterns, but choose new paths. Where you don't wait for someone to come and save you. Because you've already begun to redeem yourself. The spiritual shift begins the moment you understand that your value isn't diminished because someone didn't know how to love you. That your light isn't extinguished because someone chose darkness. That your path doesn't lose its shine just because for a time you walked with people who couldn't see beyond their own shadow. You're not here to fit into other people's stories. You're here to create your own. A story where your pain is transformed into wisdom. Where your silence becomes a voice, where your scar becomes a map. And maybe you're still in the middle of the process. You still have days when you wake up feeling powerless, without answers, without direction. But even on those days, you're still awakening. Because awakening isn't pretty, nor is it romantic. It's painful. It's confusing. It's lonely. But it's true. And what's true is always sacred. You are not the pain. You are the soul that survived it. You are the woman who chose to continue, who, even without applause, without promises, without guarantees, decided to remain standing. And that is power. Not the power that shouts, that imposes, that displays itself, but the silent power of those who know themselves, of those who heal, of those who honor themselves. If all this spoke to you, if somewhere deep down you felt that this change is also yours, write in the comments, "I awaken from the pain that silenced me." This sentence is a commitment, a reminder that your story doesn't end where it hurt. It begins again right there. The soul that loves too much sometimes just needs to be heard, not judged, not fixed, not corrected, just heard. Because there's a pain that doesn't scream. It hides behind smiles. It's okay. Conversations cut short, eyes that look away. This pain has the tone of silence. The silence you learned to cultivate so as not to scare anyone. The silence you used as a shield when you realized that talking was no use. That opening your heart only made it bleed more. And then you fell silent. You learned to swallow tears with grace. To rise up without an audience. To move forward carrying weights no one saw. But your soul, it saw, it felt. It carried with you every word you wanted to say but didn't. Every cry that became a knot. Every emotion that turned into a shadow within your chest. And now, it doesn't ask for haste. It asks for listening. It asks for presence. It asks for you to stay. To stop running away from yourself. To stop putting bandages on wounds that are still open. Don't rush silence. It's healing you too. Because silence is where everything reveals itself. It's where the noise of the world no longer distracts you. Where the soul can finally show you what you've spent years trying to ignore. Silence is the language of the soul. And perhaps you've avoided it because you feared what you'd find. But now, sitting in this moment, at this precise point in your journey, perhaps you're ready to hear what this silence has to say to you. He won't shout truths at you. He won't expose you like the world does. He'll gently whisper the parts of you that still cry hidden. He'll remind you of the versions of yourself that were left behind while you tried to be strong. He'll show you that it's not weakness to feel, that it's not desperation to need, that it's not madness to love even after everything. Because the soul that loves too much was never foolish, it just wasn't heard in time. And now that you begin to listen with your heart without interruptions, without judgment, you realize that every pain you've experienced, no matter how devastating it seemed, carried within it a seed, a key, an invitation, because every pain carries within it a hidden poetry. Not the pretty, ready-made, memorized kind, but the raw, real, profound kind. The kind that's born when you write with the blood of your experience, with the words no one wanted to hear, with the truth that only you know. And this poetry doesn't need an audience. It just needs to be recognized by you. Because healing doesn't begin when others understand what you've experienced. It begins when you decide to no longer deny what you feel. When you understand that your soul doesn't want ready-made answers. It wants presence. It wants time. It wants to be heard. It wants to be received as it is, with everything that still hurts, with everything that still pulses, with everything that still wants to transform. And in this process, you'll notice that the pain begins to change form. It stops being a ghost and becomes a teacher. It stops being a burden and becomes a bridge. Because instead of trying to get rid of it, you've started walking with it, with respect, with awareness, with gentleness, and little by little, very little by little, it begins to give you back parts of yourself you thought you'd lost. It begins to remind you that there is strength in vulnerability, beauty in depth, and light in the dark, if you have the courage to look. Rumi said that suffering prepares the soul for joy, but this joy isn't euphoria. It's not distraction. It's the serene peace that arises when you stop fighting yourself, when you accept that everything you felt was valid, that everything you experienced brought you here, and that now, with everything revealed, you can move forward with greater ease. Not because you've forgotten, but because you've understood. And understanding is the greatest gesture of love you can offer your own story. You no longer need to convince yourself that you're healed. You don't need to force yourself to be ready. You just need to be present. And let your soul at its own pace, in its own time, in its own silence, find its way back home. If throughout this video you felt as if I were talking about you, as if these words came from within your own soul, write in the comments, "My soul doesn't want to rush. It wants presence." Because sometimes, all that truly heals begins with a simple act of listening. And today, perhaps, you did that for the first time in a long time. The soul that decides to listen to itself gradually begins to remember its own path. And perhaps this is the true starting point, when you stop shouting to be heard by the world and begin to listen to yourself, silently, deeply, truthfully. There is no manual, no exact answer, no map. There is only your body that speaks through sighs and tightness, your mind that sometimes tries to understand what only the heart can feel, and above all, your soul, the one that doesn't abandon you, even when you abandon yourself. For a long time, you confused yourself with pain. You believed it was pain, that what you felt defined you, that your story was marked only by scars, by falls, by absences. But today, perhaps for the first time, you realize that you are greater than all of that you are the presence that witnesses this pain, that you are the space where everything happens and yet you remain intact, because the pain passes, but the soul, it remains, firm, silent, profound. And if the soul stays, it's because it has something to say, maybe not with words, maybe with symbols, with sensations, with intuitions that arise from within, like a gentle whisper that tells you, you are still here. And being here, despite everything, is a miracle, because you had 1,000 reasons to give up. But you didn't. You kept going, even in silence, even bleeding, even confused. And this act of going on, even without understanding, is one of the greatest gestures of love you can offer yourself. That's why at this moment I invite you to do something simple, yet deeply symbolic. Something that isn't about me, but about you. To look at your own story with the kindness that perhaps no one has ever offered you. To recognize that you no longer need to remain silent to appear strong. That you no longer need to pretend you've overcome just because time has passed. The soul doesn't have a clock. It has a rhythm. And the rhythm of the soul is slow, silent, respectful. It demands presence and courage. Courage to return to the inner places you've hastily tried to close off. Courage to embrace parts of yourself that have been denied for so long. Courage to admit that, yes, it still hurts, and that it's okay to hurt. That pain doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. It makes you alive. It connects you to the depths of existence, to that sacred space where only those who have truly felt can reach. So, allow yourself to be honest now, not with the world, but with yourself. Look within, tenderly, and acknowledge what still pulsates, the memory that still hurts, the absence that still weighs, the goodbye you pretended to accept, but that still pierces you, not to hold on to it, but to free yourself, because only that which is allowed to feel fully heals, only that which is truly embraced dissolves, and the truth is, you deserve this healing. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to be received by your own hands, without haste, without fear, without judgment. You deserve to look at yourself with the eyes you've always sought in others, and say, firmly and gently, I am here. I see myself. I hear myself. This is true engagement with your own soul. This is what takes you out of superficiality. This is what brings you back to yourself. So today, I'm not asking you for just any gesture. I'm proposing a pact, a symbolic commitment to your process. One more step toward authenticity. A small act, but with great power, commenting on something that represents this silent decision to begin letting your pain speak, not to increase the suffering, but to lessen the burden, to transform what was shadow into truth, what was silence into healing. If all this touched you in any way, if you felt that at some point this message was written for you, comment here. I allow my pain to speak, so that my soul may heal. This sentence is not just a comment. It's a declaration, an opening, a milestone, a seed planted in the soil of consciousness. And maybe, just maybe, this is the exact moment your soul begins to blossom. You've forgiven, but now it's time to free yourself. Free not only the other person, but above all yourself. Because your soul deserves not only peace, but wholeness. It deserves to breathe again without hiding the pain. It deserves to walk without the weight of unfinished stories. It deserves to feel without fear, without guilt, without rushing. And if you've come this far, it's because something inside you is ready for it, ready to stop surviving and finally start living truthfully. So now I want to speak to you, who stayed with me until the end of this video. You who didn't give up halfway through, who felt, who reflected, who perhaps even cried silently as you acknowledged your own wounds in the words I shared here. Your presence here is no coincidence. It's a sign that you're ready to continue your healing journey with awareness, depth, and soul. If this content made sense to you, if it embraced you in some way, subscribe to the channel here. Each video is a safe space where pain is respected, the soul is heard, and truth is honored. It's a path made for those who want more than answers, a real connection with their feelings, a living spirituality, and healing through poetry and courage. And if you made it to the end, leave a like too, not just as a gesture of support, but as a symbol of your commitment to this process of awakening and healing, because every step you take toward yourself deserves to be celebrated. And now, to continue this journey, there's another video waiting for you here on the screen. It was made precisely to continue this soul-searching journey. Click it, stay with me, and let's go deeper together, because the path to healing doesn't end, it deepens, and you don't have to do it alone anymore.